London, 1888. The streets of Whitechapel are shrouded in darkness, thick with fog that slithers through narrow alleys like a living thing. The gas lamps flicker, casting eerie shadows against the damp brick walls. The air is heavy with the stench of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and decay. It is a city teeming with desperation, where the poor struggle to survive, and where something sinister lurks, unseen but ever present. A predator moves through these streets, hidden in the depths of night. He is patient, calculated, and merciless. His victims are women, outcasts of society, forced into the streets to sell themselves for pennies. They are vulnerable, invisible to most, but not to him. He watches, he waits, and when the moment is right, he strikes with unrelenting brutality. London will never be the same again. August 31st, 1888. The first body is discovered just before dawn. Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, is found lying in Bucks Row. Her throat is slashed, her abdomen ripped open with surgical precision. The police arrive, but they are unprepared for such horror. Murders are common in Whitechapel, but this is different. The wounds speak of rage, of control, of something far more terrifying than a simple crime of passion. The newspaper sees the story, splashing it across their front pages. Fear spreads through the city like wildfire, but the horror has only just begun. A week later, another woman is found, Annie Chapman. Her body is left in Hanbury Street, even more mutilated than the last. Her throat is slit, her abdomen exposed, organs missing. The brutality of the act sends shockwaves through London. This is no ordinary killer. The police scramble to make sense of the carnage. Investigators flood the streets, questioning witnesses, searching for leads. But the killer is a phantom, slipping through their fingers with ease. The people of Whitechapel whisper in fear. Who could do such a thing? A doctor, a butcher, a madman? Theories emerge, but answers remain elusive. The city waits, dreading what might come next. Then, on a single night, the horror escalates. September 30th, 1888. 2 women are murdered within hours of each other. Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. The killer grows bolder, more reckless. Stride's body is found first, her throat cut, but little else. Did he get interrupted? Did something scare him away? Moments later, Eddowes is found, her body savage beyond recognition. He is evolving, growing more confident. Now, terror grips London with an iron fist. The city is no longer just afraid, it is in a frenzy. The newspapers fuel the panic, dubbing the killer Jack the Ripper after a taunting letter arrives at the police station. The letter is bold, mocking, and signed with a name that will become legend. The police are desperate. The Queen herself demands action. But the Ripper is always one step ahead. The manhunt intensifies. Detectives patrol the streets. Informants whisper in dark corners, but the trail remains cold. False accusations lead to riots. Innocent men are beaten, some nearly lynched by angry mobs. The working-class residents of Whitechapel grow restless. The authorities have failed them. The killer walks among them, unseen, untouchable. And he is not done. The worst is yet to come. November 9th, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, the most beautiful, the most brutally murdered. Unlike the others, she is found indoors, in her own bed. But what remains of her barely resembles a human form. She is butchered, her face unrecognizable, her body dissected like an animal. It is a scene so gruesome that even hardened detectives recoil. Then, silence. No more bodies, no more letters. Jack the Ripper vanishes. The case grows cold. The police have no answers, no arrests, no justice for the women who died so violently. Theories multiply. Was he a doctor? A nobleman? A lunatic? Did he flee the city? Or did he simply stop, content with the chaos he had wrought? The mystery endures, refusing to fade. Jack the Ripper is more than a man. He is an enigma, a legend, a nightmare that refuses to die. Even today, over a century later, his shadow lingers over history. Books are written, documentaries produced, experts debate his identity. But the truth remains elusive, lost in the fog of time. The streets of Whitechapel have changed, but the echoes of his crimes still whisper through the alleys. And so, the legend of Jack the Ripper lives on, haunting the world, a riddle without an answer. Whitechapel in the late 19th century was a place of struggle, a breeding ground for crime and despair. The district overflowed with the poor, the desperate, and the forgotten. Narrow alleys twisted like a labyrinth, filled with the scent of sweat, filth, and cheap gin. Women who walked these streets at night were not just prostitutes, they were survivors, clinging to existence in a city that cared nothing for them. The Ripper's victims were among London's most vulnerable. They lived in lodging houses, barely able to afford a night's rest. Many drank to numb their suffering, stumbling through the fog-choked streets. This was their world, one of hunger, sickness, and violence. And it was here, among these lost souls, that Jack the Ripper hunted. He chose them carefully, striking with terrifying precision. Marianne Nichols, the first known victim, had seen hardship. At 43, she had lost her family, her home, and her dignity. On the night of August 30th, she wandered through Whitechapel, rejected by lodging houses for lack of money. Hours later, she was dead, her throat slashed twice, her body mutilated. The discovery of her corpse was shocking, but no one could have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. Then came the double event, 2 murders, one night. September 30th, 1888. Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered first, her throat freshly cut. But something was different. There was no mutilation. Some believe the killer had been interrupted. If so, he wasn't about to leave the night unfulfilled. Just 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was found. And this time, the mutilation was worse than ever before. Eddowes' body was carved open, her kidney removed, her face slashed beyond recognition. Near the scene, a chilling message was found scrawled in chalk. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. The meaning remains debated, but the terror it inspired was undeniable. Jack the Ripper was escalating. His cruelty was growing. The police knew they were running out of time. The investigation was one of the largest in British history. Detectives combed the streets, knocking on doors, interrogating suspects. They followed countless leads, each one a dead end. Theories flourished. Was he a doctor, using his knowledge of anatomy to dissect his victims? A butcher, accustomed to blood and blades? Or was he someone completely unexpected, hiding in plain sight? The press played a crucial role in the case. Newspapers sensationalized the killings, feeding the public's growing fear. Every detail, no matter how gruesome, was printed for all to read. The letters only made things worse. The infamous Dear Boss letter was the first to use the name Jack the Ripper, a name that would strike fear into generations to come. But was it real, or just a hoax? Then came the From Hell letter, arguably the most disturbing of all. Unlike the others, it wasn't signed with the Ripper's name. Instead, it contained a gruesome souvenir, piece of a human kidney, supposedly from one of the victims. The letter taunted the police, mocking their efforts. The press went wild. But as the fear reached its peak, the killings suddenly stopped. Mary Jane Kelly, the final and most brutally murdered victim, was different from the others. She was younger, more vibrant. Unlike the rest, she was killed indoors. Her room became a slaughterhouse, her body so viciously torn apart that even the most hardened detectives were shaken. After her death, there were no more killings, no more letters. Jack the Ripper had vanished, as suddenly as he appeared. And so, the greatest mystery of the Victorian era was born. Who was he? Why did he stop? Did he die? Was he arrested for another crime? Or did he simply move on, taking his horrors elsewhere? Over a century later, the case remains unsolved. Theories abound, each one as compelling as the last. But the truth is buried in the fog of time, lost forever. Yet, Jack the Ripper is not forgotten. His name lingers, whispered in dark corners, analyzed in books, films, and documentaries. Historians, criminologists, and amateur sleuths still search for answers. The murders of 1888 are more than just a crime story. They are a legend, a shadow that stretches across time, refusing to fade. And somewhere, in the depths of history, the Ripper's secret remains untold. The case of Jack the Ripper is unlike any other. It is not just a crime story, it is a mystery that has endured for more than a century. Most killers leave behind a resolution, an ending. Jack the Ripper did not. He slipped through the cracks of history, leaving only horror in his wake. His identity remains unknown, his motives unclear. The unanswered questions keep his legend alive, fueling speculation and obsession. The suspects were many, yet none could be proven guilty. Some believe the killer was a doctor, based on the precise nature of the wounds. Others claim he was a butcher, accustomed to handling flesh and blood. Then there were those who thought he was a nobleman, someone wealthy enough to disappear without suspicion. Each theory has its supporters, but none have brought closure. One of the most infamous suspects was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and school teacher. He was found dead in the River Thames shortly after the murders ended. Some believed he had taken his own life out of guilt. Others thought he was framed. But there was no real evidence tying him to the crimes. He was a suspect simply because his death coincided with the Ripper's disappearance. Another name often mentioned is Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel at the time. He was known to be mentally unstable, and some detectives were convinced he was the killer. Later DNA tests on a shawl linked to one of the victims claimed to support this theory, but the results were controversial. The evidence was old, contaminated, and far from conclusive. The mystery remained unsolved. Then there was Dr. Francis Tumblety, an American quack doctor with a deep hatred for women. He was in London during the murders and was arrested for other crimes before fleeing back to the United States. Some believe he was the Ripper, hiding behind his medical knowledge. But there was no proof, only speculation. Another name on a long list of suspects. The real killer remained in the shadows. Even Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, has been accused. Some theories claim he contracted syphilis and went mad, targeting prostitutes in a violent rage. Others say he was involved in a cover-up, protecting someone within the royal family. But there is no solid evidence to support these claims. It is just another legend, another story woven into the myth of Jack the Ripper. One of the strangest theories involves Joe the Ripper, the idea that the killer was not a man, but a woman. Some suggest it was a midwife, someone who could move through Whitechapel unnoticed, covered in blood without suspicion. The idea is intriguing, but there is little to support it. The murders were brutal, savage. Many believe they were the work of a man consumed by rage. Then there is the possibility that Jack the Ripper was never just one person. Could it have been multiple killers, working together? Was it a secret society, covering their tracks? Or was it something even more chilling, someone hiding in plain sight, slipping through the fingers of history without a trace? The truth is elusive, hidden beneath layers of time, myth, and speculation. The Ripper case changed London forever. Before his reign of terror, Whitechapel was already a dangerous place. But his crimes exposed the failures of the police, the corruption in society, and the suffering of the poor. The murders forced London to confront the reality of its slums, the desperation of those forced into the streets. In a way, Jack the Ripper's legacy is not just about horror, it is about history. The letters he sent only added to the mystery. Some believe they were hoaxes, written by journalists to sell papers. Others think they were real, direct messages from the killer himself. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jack postcard, and the infamous From Hell letter all played a role in shaping his legend. But whether he truly wrote them remains unknown. They are part of the enigma. Today, Jack the Ripper is more than a killer, he is a symbol of the unknown, the faceless horror lurking in the dark. His story has inspired countless books, films, and theories. He has become the ghost of Whitechapel, a presence that refuses to be forgotten. His victims Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly are remembered, their tragic fate forever linked to his name. As the years pass, the questions remain. Will we ever uncover the truth? Or is Jack the Ripper destined to remain a mystery, a name without a face, a shadow without form? The answers may never come. But as long as the fog rolls through Whitechapel, as long as the city remembers the fear, Jack the Ripper will never truly disappear. His legend is eternal. The horror of Jack the Ripper did not end in 1888. His crimes left a scar on London, one that never fully faded. The streets of Whitechapel, once teeming with fear, have changed. The buildings are different, the people are new, but his name lingers. Tourists walk the same alleys where his victims once stumbled. The past feels close, as if the echoes of that terrible autumn still whisper through the fog. Historians, detectives, and amateur sleuths have spent decades searching for answers. Files have been examined, witness statements reanalyzed, and evidence tested with modern technology. Each new theory brings a flicker of hope. Perhaps this time, the mystery will be solved. Yet each time, the truth slips away, lost in the shadows of time. The Ripper remains a ghost, untouchable, unknowable. What makes Jack the Ripper so unique is not just his brutality, but his mystery. Most serial killers are eventually unmasked, their faces revealed, their stories told. But Jack the Ripper never had an ending. He is an unfinished story, a puzzle with missing pieces. His legend has only grown, evolving with time, reshaped by each new generation that dares to ask, who was he? Some believe modern technology could finally unmask him. DNA testing, forensic analysis, and psychological profiling have all been applied to the case. The results are always the same: inconclusive, debated, uncertain. The evidence is too old, too contaminated. The killer is still one step ahead, just as he was in 1888. No matter how much the world advances, Jack the Ripper remains beyond reach. Even the police of the time were outmatched. They had no forensics, no criminal profiling, no CCTV. They relied on witness statements, on intuition, on luck. The streets were dark, the alleys twisting and endless. The killer knew this world better than they did. He moved through it unseen, striking with precision, leaving behind no clues beyond his victims' bodies. The investigation was plagued with mistakes. The crime scenes were often disturbed, crucial evidence lost. The famous chalk message, possibly left by the killer, was erased before it could be properly documented. Suspects were arrested and released, leads were followed and abandoned. In the end, the police were left with nothing. The frustration of their failure still lingers in history, yet Jack the Ripper did more than terrify a city. He changed the way crime was investigated. His case led to advancements in forensic science, in criminal profiling, in the study of serial killers. He was one of the first true media-driven murderers, his crimes sensationalized in newspapers across the world. In a twisted way, he helped shape modern detective work, even as he evaded justice. The psychological profile of Jack the Ripper is as debated as his identity. Was he a sadist, deriving pleasure from his victim's pain? Was he a psychopath, completely detached from empathy? Or was he something even darker, someone who killed not for rage or desire, but simply because he could? His murders suggest control, precision. He was not reckless, he was deliberate. Some experts believe he was highly intelligent, able to blend into society, to appear normal. Others think he was a loner, someone barely noticed by those around him. The truth is unknowable. Without a name, without a face, we can only guess. But one thing is certain: whoever he was not ordinary. He was a man who became a myth, a nightmare that never ended. Even today, the fascination with Jack the Ripper continues. Books, films, documentaries, his story has been told in countless ways, each time with a new twist, a new theory. Some see him as a monster, others as a mystery to be solved. But perhaps the real horror is that he was just a man, walking the same streets as everyone else, unnoticed, unremarkable until he struck. Whitechapel has changed, but reminders of the past remain. The 10 Bells pub, where some of the victims once drank, still stands. The streets where they were found have been paved over, but the history lingers. Walking through this part of London, it is impossible not to feel the weight of what happened here. The fear may have faded, but the legend never will. What drives our obsession with Jack the Ripper? Is it the mystery, the unanswered questions? Or is it something darker, our fascination with the depths of human cruelty? His story is one of horror, of suffering, of fear. But it is also a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Some monsters remain in the dark, their secrets buried forever. And so, Jack the Ripper remains, a whisper in the fog, a shadow in the night. His name endures, his crimes remembered. The case is cold, the trail long gone. But as long as people walk the streets of Whitechapel, as long as the legend is told, he is never truly gone. The past is closer than we think, and some ghosts never rest. Jack the Ripper is more than a killer, he is a story. A story that has lasted for more than a century, whispered in dark corners, studied by scholars and detectives alike. He was not the first murderer, nor the last, but he became the most infamous. His legend has grown larger than the man himself, transforming him into something beyond a criminal. He is a ghost, a myth, a symbol of terror. Perhaps it is the mystery that keeps us fascinated. There is something uniquely terrifying about an unsolved crime. We like endings, answers, closure, but Jack the Ripper denied us that. He left behind a puzzle with missing pieces, a riddle with no solution. And that is why we return to his story, again and again, searching for something that may never be found. Over the years, new suspects have emerged, new theories have taken shape. Some claim secret societies were involved, covering up the identity of the real killer. Others suggest the police knew the truth but kept it hidden to prevent public panic. There are even theories that Jack the Ripper was not a man at all, but a woman, operating unnoticed in a city obsessed with hunting a male predator. One theory suggests that the killings were not random, but part of a larger plan. Some believe the murders were ritualistic, possibly connected to the Freemasons. The idea that a secret organization could be behind the crimes has been explored in books and films, adding another layer of intrigue to an already complex case. But like all theories, it remains speculation no more than a shadow. Some have argued that Jack the Ripper never stopped killing, that he moved to a new city, changed his methods, continued his reign of terror elsewhere. Some link him to murders in America, particularly the case of H. Holmes, a doctor who built a murder hotel in Chicago. Could the same man have committed both sets of crimes? It is an idea, as chilling as it is unlikely. Then there is the theory that Jack the Ripper was simply lucky, that he was not a mastermind, not a genius, but just a man who killed in a time when crime scene investigation was primitive. Perhaps he was not clever, but the police were incompetent. Perhaps he did not disappear, but was caught for another crime, dying in prison, his name unknown to history. Despite the endless speculation, one truth remains: Jack the Ripper was never caught. No one was ever charged, no trial was ever held. His case remains open, a wound in history that refuses to heal. The fact that we still talk about him today, that we still search for his identity, proves that his story is not just about murder, it is about the power of the unknown. Whitechapel has moved on, but its past lingers. The Ripper's victims, once forgotten women, now have their names etched into history. They were more than victims. They were mothers, daughters, friends. Their lives mattered. And while Jack the Ripper became legend, they became something even more important: reminders that true crime is not about the killer, but about those left behind. In the end, perhaps that is why we tell this story. Not because we glorify the killer, but because we seek to understand. We tried to make sense of the senseless. We tried to find order in chaos. Jack the Ripper remains a mystery, a specter that haunts history. But perhaps the greatest mystery is not who he was, but why his story still holds us in its grip after all these years. Will we ever know the truth? It is unlikely. Too much time has passed, too many records lost. The real Jack the Ripper has long since turned to dust. But his story endures, and as long as people whisper his name, as long as theories emerge, as long as the mystery remains, Jack the Ripper will never truly die. He is history's nightmare, a ghost of the past that refuses to be forgotten. Even as new crimes capture the world's attention, the shadow of Jack the Ripper remains. He was the first modern serial killer, the one who set the template for all who followed. His name stands beside the worst of history: Bundy, Dahmer, Zodiac. But unlike them, he is a phantom, a killer without a face, a name without a man. And perhaps that is what makes him the most terrifying of all. Imagine walking those streets, the same streets where the Ripper once prowled. The fog curls around your feet, the gaslights flicker, the past feels closer here. In the silence, you can almost hear the echoes of footsteps, the whispers of a city gripped by fear. Jack the Ripper may be gone, but Whitechapel remembers. The city does not forget, and neither do we. The fear that gripped Whitechapel in 1888 was unlike anything the city had ever known. People locked their doors, whispering in hushed tones about the killer who walked among them. The police patrolled the streets, but their presence brought little comfort. The Ripper seemed unstoppable, a ghost in the darkness. No one knew when he would strike next, and that uncertainty was what made him truly terrifying. The working class lived in constant dread. Women, especially those who had no choice but to walk the streets at night, feared that each step could be their last. They looked over their shoulders, watching for shadows that moved too quickly, for footsteps that seemed too deliberate. But Jack the Ripper was careful. He did not stalk his victims in the way most killers do. He waited until they were alone, vulnerable. The victims were not wealthy, not powerful. They were women who lived on the fringes of society, unseen by those who could have protected them. That is part of what made the case so tragic. The world only paid attention after they were murdered. Their deaths made headlines, their names were remembered, but in life, they were ignored, struggling to survive in a city that had no mercy. And yet, despite the intense fear and panic, some saw opportunity. The press turned Jack the Ripper into a sensation. Each murder brought new headlines, new theories. Readers were fascinated by the gruesome details. Some newspapers exaggerated, inventing details to sell more copies. Others used the murders to push political agendas, blaming immigrants, criminals, or the failures of the police force. Jack the Ripper's legend grew not just because of his crimes, but because of the way they were reported. His name became famous, his story turned into something more than just a series of killings. He became a symbol of evil, a nightmare personified. Even those who did not live in Whitechapel felt his presence, as if his shadow stretched far beyond the streets he once haunted. As the years passed, the fear faded, but the legend remained. Theories multiplied, each one more intriguing than the last. Some believed the murders were part of a grand conspiracy. Others thought Jack the Ripper was just the beginning, that he had continued to kill under different names, in different places. But without solid proof, the mystery remained, unsolved and unstoppable. Some historians argue that Jack the Ripper's legacy is less about the crimes themselves and more about the impact they had on society. His murders exposed the deep divide between the rich and the poor, the privileged and the forgotten. The squalor of Whitechapel was suddenly in the spotlight, its suffering no longer ignored. In a way, the Ripper forced London to see what it had long tried to forget. Before the murders, the struggles of Whitechapel's poor were hidden in plain sight. The slums were overcrowded, disease was rampant, and violence was a part of daily life. The city's elite looked the other way, but after the Ripper's killings, the world paid attention. The conditions of the East End became impossible to ignore. Some believe this attention led to reforms, to changes that helped the poorest in society. But even with these changes, the murders themselves remained an obsession. People wanted answers. Who was Jack the Ripper? Why did he kill? What drove him to such brutality? Psychologists have studied the case. Criminologists have analyzed the patterns. Yet no one has come close to solving the mystery. The case has become an enigma, one that no amount of research seems able to crack. Each suspect brings a different story, a different possibility. Some believe the Ripper was insane, killing without reason. Others think he was methodical, careful, intelligent. There are those who claim he stopped because he was caught for another crime, or because he was killed. But there is no proof, only speculation, only theories that lead nowhere. The truth remains just out of reach. Some believe that the answer lies in the letters, in the handwriting, in the phrasing. The infamous "From Hell" letter, with its piece of a human kidney, is seen as the most authentic. But even if it was truly from the killer, what does it tell us? That he enjoyed taunting the police, that he wanted recognition? Or was it simply another layer of the mystery, another clue that leads nowhere? Jack the Ripper did not just kill people, he left a mystery behind, one that refuses to be solved. His name is etched into history, a reminder that some evils are never brought to justice. He remains a puzzle, a ghost of the past, a story without an ending. And perhaps that is what makes him the most terrifying of all. Because even now, over a century later, he is still watching from the shadows. The mystery of Jack the Ripper has captivated generations. Unlike most killers, he did not fade into history. His crimes have been studied, debated, and dissected for over a century. Theories come and go, suspects are named and dismissed, but the truth remains elusive. Why do we continue searching? Why does his story still haunt us? Perhaps it is because we fear what he represents, the idea that some killers are never caught. There is something uniquely terrifying about an unsolved crime. It leaves us unsettled, questioning how such horror could happen without consequence. Most murderers face justice. They are arrested, tried, and sentenced. But Jack the Ripper escaped. He vanished into the fog, leaving behind only bodies and questions. And that, more than anything, is what makes him so unforgettable. Even in the modern world, serial killers leave behind patterns, evidence, DNA. But Jack the Ripper existed in a time before forensic science, before fingerprints, before profiling. He killed in an era when the police were overwhelmed, when crime scenes were chaotic. The lack of solid evidence has allowed his legend to grow, feeding theories, keeping the mystery alive. He is not just a killer, he is a puzzle. Some believe he stopped killing after Mary Jane Kelly. But what if he didn't? What if he simply changed his methods? Some researchers believe he may have continued his crimes elsewhere, blending into a different city, hiding behind a new identity. Could he have been responsible for other unsolved murders? Could his story stretch beyond Whitechapel? Beyond 1888, the thought is chilling. Theories of his survival fuel speculation. Some claim he moved to America, starting a new life, a new spree of killings. Others believe he was arrested for an unrelated crime, locked away before he could kill again. And then there are those who think he simply died, his name lost to history. If that is true, then his secret died with him, buried in an unmarked grave, never to be revealed. But what if the police knew his identity all along? Some suggest that the authorities covered up the truth, either to protect a high-profile suspect or to avoid public panic. If Jack the Ripper was someone powerful, someone untouchable, would the police have dared to arrest him? Could the greatest mystery in crime history be nothing more than a well-guarded secret? It is a possibility that cannot be ignored. Yet, despite the endless speculation, the victims are often forgotten. Their names Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Cully are remembered only because of their gruesome deaths. But who were they before the Ripper found them? They were women with lives, with struggles, with dreams. And in the end, they were reduced to headlines and fear. The tragedy of the case is not just the horror of the crimes, but the way these women were erased by history. They were poor, vulnerable, living on the fringes of society. And after they died, they became symbols of something greater, their personal stories lost beneath the weight of the legend. It is a grim reminder of how the world values mystery over humanity, fear over justice. Jack the Ripper did not create fear, he simply exposed it. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the unseen killer lurking in the dark. His crimes held a mirror to Victorian society, forcing people to confront the horrors hidden in their own city. And even today, as his legend endures, he reminds us of something terrifying, that some monsters are never caught, and some nightmares never end. Could the Ripper exist today? It is an unsettling thought. The world has changed, technology has advanced, but evil has not disappeared. Serial killers still walk among us. The difference is that now, they are hunted with modern tools, DNA, surveillance, profiling. Yet even with these advancements, some killers still evade capture. The Ripper may be history, but his legacy remains. His story has been retold in countless ways. Books, films, documentaries, each one shaping his image, turning him into something larger than life. Some portray him as a shadowy figure, others as a man hiding in plain sight. Some see him as a genius, others as a madman. The truth is, we do not know, and that is why his legend refuses to die. As long as we ask the question, who was Jack the Ripper, he still exists. Imagine standing in Whitechapel on a cold autumn night. The streets are quiet, the city asleep. The fog drifts through the alleyways, swallowing the gaslight. You hear footsteps echoing on the cobblestones behind you. You turn, but there is nothing, just the night, just the empty streets. And yet, for a moment, you wonder. Could it be? Could his shadow still be watching? The fear lingers, the mystery remains, and so, the story of Jack the Ripper remains unfinished. More than a century has passed, and still, we have no name, no face, no closure. His crimes are frozen in time, locked in history like an unsolved riddle. Every few years, new theories emerge, new suspects are suggested, but the truth slips further away. He is not just a killer, he is a mystery, and mysteries have a way of lasting forever. The world has changed since 1888. The streets of Whitechapel are no longer the same. The fog, the gas lamps, the desperate faces, they are gone, but the fear he created still lingers. His name is whispered in books, in films, in conversations between those who seek answers. He is studied, analyzed, dissected like a specimen in a crime lab. And yet, he remains untouchable, forever out of reach. Perhaps that is why his legend has endured. He was not just a man, he became something else, a ghost in the dark, a shadow in history. The moment he vanished, he became immortal. No trial, no execution, no resolution. Just questions, endless and unanswerable. We are left to wonder, was he an ordinary man who got away with murder? Or was he something more, something we were never meant to understand? The truth is, we may never know. His identity is buried in time, lost in the fog of a city that no longer remembers him as a person, but as a nightmare. But maybe, just maybe, that is what he wanted all along. Not to be known, not to be caught, but to be remembered. To haunt the world forever, long after his body turned to dust. And in that, he has succeeded. So, as the story comes to an end, one final question remains. Not who was Jack the Ripper, but something far more haunting. Does it even matter? Perhaps the real terror is not in knowing his name, but in the realization that he could have been anyone. A stranger passing by, a face in the crowd. A man who walked among us, unnoticed until it was too late. And so, the legend lives on. The cobblestones of Whitechapel may be new, the buildings replaced, but the shadows remain. And in the dead of night, when the streets are empty and the fog rolls in, you might just feel that lingering presence, that whisper of fear, because some mysteries are never solved. Some ghosts never fade, and some monsters never die.